you can start. I'm going to do a little review. I did not have the review sheet here. So if you grab your review sheets and a pen or a pencil, the first one is, if intelligent human beings can't create anything close to the human brain, why should we expect non-intelligent natural laws to do so? So intelligent and non-intelligent. Okay, we cannot recreate evolution intelligently. How do we think it happened non-intelligently with natural laws? I mentioned how they don't have the answers, so they have to come up with crazy theories, okay? It's just, they want to say, you must have so much faith. I'm like, you have more faith than I do. I remember Pastor Malone, he was in Midwestern, and he told the story. He goes, this guy comes up, he's pumping gas, and the guy comes up with a cigarette, and he goes, aren't you the pastor of that church? He goes, yeah. He goes, you must have a lot of faith. He's watching the guy smoking at the gas pump. He goes, buddy, you got more faith than I do. And really, they have more faith than we do. We looked at some of their things they believe. They believe the multiverse. We kind of laugh and think that's a, Marvel Comics crazy thing. Well, they actually believe it. They have no proof, no evidence. They don't have answers on how the complexity and how the factors that would be required to create life, so they just make up this crazy theory that nobody can prove and nobody has evidence. But they'll believe stuff like that. I mean, that takes sheer faith. What's the other one they believe in? Aliens. Sent for just random reasons, sent some life molecules to another planet, and just, like a little balloon, you send a message off and you don't know. I don't know if we're supposed to write back now to this, there's just no evidence. We don't have any, they just make it up, okay? It just proves how difficult it is to create life from non-living things. We looked at macroevolution. Is the blank there? Macroevolution is the belief that all life forms have descended from a common ancestor, first one-celled creature, and all this happened by natural processes without any intelligent intervention. Very confused. Did I skip one? I'm good? You got the first one? Everybody's saying I'm good. My wife is saying I'm not good.
Natural what has never been observed to create new types?
I said macroevolution is the belief. I missed it then. Sorry.
Natural blank has never been observed to create new types.
Natural selection.
Natural selection. Okay. I must have missed that one. Sorry. What?
The next one is macroevolution.
Yes, the third one. Sorry. I have to fix that. Thank you, honey, for pointing that out that I messed up. No. Everybody else was just silent. I never would have known. But I appreciate that. Okay, so macroevolution is that one. They make no distinction between microevolution and macroevolution. Am I good on that? Just speak up if I messed up. And thus use the evidence for micro to prove macro. By failing to make this critical distinction, Darwinists can dupe the general public into thinking that any observable change in any organism proves that all life has evolved from the first one-celled creature. Okay, basically what they're saying is we see a little variation between beaks of birds, so therefore we can go from one-celled organism to a human, no problem. Microevolution has been observed, but it cannot be used as evidence for macroevolution, which has never been observed. Microevolution is variation within a species. Certain conditions, it does better. I remember in my textbooks, they had the speckled moth. I don't know if you remembered that. And what happened in England, there was a white speckled moth and a black speckled moth, and the white one was dominant. And then they started the Industrial Revolution and all the smog, and the trees got covered with smog, so the white ones stood out, and the black ones became more prevalent, and I think it became 80% the black ones and 20% the white ones. Well, what is that? That's microevolution, okay? Yes, there's survival of the fittest, but does that create anything new? Absolutely. Both versions were there before. One just became more dominant than the other, Okay, that's just what happens. That doesn't prove that you can go from goo to the zoo through, whatever that expression, I can't remember it, but it doesn't prove that. They want to extrapolate this for a little bit of evidence. Microevolution does not prove macroevolution. We have not observed that. We haven't observed something going from one species to another. Okay, we have plenty of variation within species. Look at dogs, plenty of variation. You get all sorts of dogs. Are they still dogs? We haven't seen dogs go to something else that's not a dog. They're still dogs. Just because you have variation, microevolution, does not mean that we can extrapolate to macroevolution. We looked at genetic limits. Genetic limits. Darwinists say that microevolution within types proves that macroevolution has occurred. These small changes can occur over a short period of time. Think what natural selection can do over a long period of time. That's what they say. They say, well, look at this, little changes. We can see this. We must be able to make these ginormous changes. Well, Darwin didn't even know about genetics. He didn't know about genetic limits. There's a limit. We can't keep breeding tall females and tall males and just getting taller and make giants, okay? There is a limit to what we can do, okay? Every species has a genetic limit. You can't just take the longest necked horses and make giraffes eventually, okay? There's a limit. Even when we've been breeding these animals for thousands of years, intelligently breeding them, we haven't made any new species, okay? We can breed certain types and we can do certain things, but they're still dogs, they're still cattle, there's limits to what we can do. They've even tried fruit flies. They have a short lifespan and they get some weird mutations and they ended up having issues and they die. But we cannot get a different species, even in doing that intelligently. So cyclical changes is the next blank. Not only are there genetic limits to change within a type, but the change within type appears to be cyclical. In other words, changes are not directional towards the development of new life forms as macroevolutionary requires, but they simply shift back and forth within a limited range. We looked at their big argument is the beaks, Darwin's finches on the Galapagos. Well, what do? They realized they would change back according to the seasons. It's cyclical. Okay, you have a sine curve like this. You can't take the first 2 points and say, well, it must go this way and keep going forever, extrapolate forever. It's a cycle. It goes back and forth. Notice also that natural selection cannot explain how finches came into existence in the first place. In other words, natural selection may be able to explain the survival of a species. It cannot explain the arrival of a species. Okay? Survival and arrival. Did I have that one in there? Oh, sorry. Okay, should have had that. Okay, what? I did have it in there? No? Okay. All right, so explain survival, not arrival. We're looking at the next one is irreducible complexity. Irreducible complexity is irreducible is the blank there. In 1859, Charles Darwin wrote, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. Can anybody out the top of their head give me an example of something that really can't be formed by slight modifications in the human body? I don't have it written down there. The eye, the human eye is one of those, okay? It is so complex. What? They're unlimited, but I mean, that is one of the most complex things. What happens if you take one lens, you take one chemical, you take one thing out, the whole thing doesn't function, right? And Darwin didn't even have an answer for that. He couldn't even explain. Go try to look up and try to get their explanations for how the eye could have evolved. It just is astounding. Everything has to be the perfect lenses, have to be everything perfect ratios, everything has to be just right in order for the eye to work. So he even admitted, I don't understand, I don't know how the eye, and he didn't even understand how complex it really was. We know that there are many organs, systems, and processes in life that fit that description. So what is he saying? If there's these organs that can't be bit by piece evolve, then my theory goes out the window. Well, we know there's many organs that fall into that category. One of those is the cell. In Darwin's day, the cell was a black box, a mysterious little part of life that no one could see into. But now that we have the ability to peer into the cell, we see that life at the molecular level is far more complex than Darwin ever dreamed. In fact, it is irreducibly complex. An irreducibly complex system is composed of several well-matched interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any of the parts that causes a system to effectively cease functioning. The blanks there are parts for both of them. Okay, that's a definition of an irreducibly complex system. Okay, you can't take one part out and it still works. Those are the words of Michael Behe, the professor of biochemistry at Lehigh University, who wrote the revolutionary book Darwin's Black Box, The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution. Behe's research verifies that living things are literally filled with molecular machines that perform the numerous functions of life. Wish I had a video. There is just a simple, I can't remember the name of it. It had a tail that spun around, and they once they realized that it was very complex. It was like an outboard motor that was spinning this, and all the parts that it was just amazing. But it looked like a little, when you looked at it, just looked like a little tail whipping around. But it was just like a actual little mini motor in there. And it was way more complex than they realized. The molecular machines are irreducibly complex, meaning that all the parts of each machine must be completely formed in the right places, in the right sizes, in operating order, at the same time for the machine to function. You must have all the pieces together. One of the examples is a car engine. It's an irreducibly complex system. If a change is made in the size of the pistons, this would require simultaneous changes in the camshaft block, cooling system, engine compartment, and other systems, or the new engine would not function. Take a few pieces out of somebody's car and see how that goes. Okay, you may be able to survive without a couple of them. You start taking a couple important pieces out, it doesn't work. Now what they're saying is take that and try to transform it into something piece by piece. You change one piece, you got to change all the pieces. It's very complex. Just put the wrong part in that doesn't match. You know, you go into the parts store and they give you the wrong part, and it doesn't work. Brother Winstead's, your husband's experienced that, and they thought they had the right part, and it's just slightly off, and the whole thing doesn't work. Okay. Behe shows that living things are irreducibly complex, just like a car engine. With painstaking detail, he shows the numerous functions in the body, such as blood clotting. Okay, you have to have both. You have to have the, Mrs. Oliveri knows, okay, if you don't have the clotting agent, if you don't have the different things that are involved, it doesn't work. They've all got to be at the same time. Vision, I mentioned that. The eye, you've got to have every part. It's so I don't have time to get in. I could read a page of just how complex, how the eye works. It's so complex we don't really we don't understand it. It's very complex. Require irreducibly complex systems that could not have developed in the gradual Darwinian fashion. Why? Because intermediates would be non-functional. You can't have all these non-functional parts. There'd be no reason for them, and all of a sudden the last part gets in there and it works. Okay? If you take a part out of your car, what do you have? You have a couple 1,000-pound, dead car sitting in your driveway. Just take the battery out. I don't know if anybody's having trouble starting their car in the cold weather. The battery doesn't work. I got a lump of car that's useless. I can't even get that car out of the way to get the other car in front of it. I'm stuck. Lucky my neighbor came and was able to jump my car, but all of a sudden the whole thing is just useless. You don't develop all these pieces for nothing. Okay, they're useless. They would be funneled out and taken care of through natural selection. Okay, if a creature had a bunch of useless parts that were slowing it down, okay, it wouldn't survive, would it? Okay, we had a bunch of useless things that had no purpose. They would be taken care of swiftly. Okay, and you don't wait till the last piece comes in. Why? Because intermediates would be non-functional. As with a car engine, all the right parts must be in place in the right size at the right time for there to be any function at all. You can't build an engine part by part, and that still takes intelligence, but you can't drive to work with only a partial engine under the hood. In the same way, living systems quickly become non-functional if they were modified piece by piece. Okay? Behe's discoveries are fatal for Darwinism. Irreducible complexity means that new life cannot come into existence by the Darwinian method of slight successive changes over a long period of time. I just have a simple example. He uses it in the book. This is a basic what? Mousetrap. Okay, it's got like 5 parts. Okay, what happens if I have 4 of the 5 parts? It's useless. So they have to make up a story for each part developing. Well, the base and then they had to make up a reason that the base was just randomly there, and that it kept it, and that this evolution, this change was brought out through successive generations. And the second part, they have to make up some weird reason, just make up stories about how it could have, the reason, they have to have an alternate reason that these 2 parts, evolved, and that it somehow was beneficial. And then the third part, the little spring, is beneficial. And they had to make up all these stories till the last part, and then it works. Okay, that's just a simple 5-part little mousetrap that you can't explain piece by piece. There's no reason for each 4 pieces to supposedly develop and until the 5th piece comes along. That's just a 5-piece basic little system. I do recommend, just so everybody knows, there are electronic mousetraps. They're really good. Make sure you keep the batteries going, otherwise they'll just lick the peanut butter off. Peanut butter, and they're very humane. You just open it and tip them. It's very good. It's just putting that out there. They work really good. Darwinism is akin to natural force. Without any intelligent help producing a running car engine, i.e. an amoeba, and then modifying that irreducibly complex engine into successive intermediate engines until those natural forces finally produce the space shuttle, i.e. human beings. Do you get how I don't have that much faith, okay? Producing a running car engine, okay, which just takes extreme amount of engineering and science, and it's just, we've been developing it for 100 years, over 100 years. I can't remember when the first car came out, but they've been working on engines, and just an amazing amount of engineering that goes into it, and to change it for successive parts, to change it to a space shuttle doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't work. It doesn't happen. You take 1 or 2 parts out, it doesn't work. Okay, but so with intelligence, it doesn't work. Without intelligence, it really doesn't work. Darwinists can't explain the source of the materials to make an engine, much less how any irreducibly complex engine came in to be in the first place. Nor can they just demonstrate that unintelligent process by which any engine has evolved into the space shuttle while providing propulsion at every intermediate step. Okay, every step it has to be working, right? Okay, once it stops working, it's going to get picked off and it's done, and you won't survive. So it just boggles my mind. We can't do it with intelligence. There's no way it could happen unintelligently. This is evident from the complete absence of explanation from Darwinists for how irreducibly complex systems could arise gradually. Behe exposes the empty claims of Darwinists when he writes, "The idea of Darwinian molecular evolution is not based on science. There is no publication in the scientific literature, in journals or books, that describes how molecular evolution of any real, complex biochemical either did occur or even might have occurred. There are no assertions that such an evolution occurred, but absolutely none are supposed by pertinent experiments or calculations. Since there is no authority on which to base claims of knowledge, it can truly be said that the assertion of Darwinian molecular evolution is merely bluster." Okay, they can't recreate it. We don't see it happening, yet they have faith that it happens. The feeble attempts by Darwinists to deal with irreducible complexity reveal the magnitude of the problem for their theory. During an Intelligent Design conference in July 2002, at which both Behe and Frank Turek were speakers, one particular Darwinist was a bit militant during the question and answer period of the lectures. Frank wanted to turn the tables and ask him a few questions, so he made it a point to sit next to him during lunch. "What do you do with Behe's irreducible complexity argument?" Frank asked between pizza slices. He rolled his eyes and said, "Oh, that's no big deal. There are biochemical scaffolds that are built around the system to allow it to evolve gradually." Okay? When Frank saw Behe later that day, he told him about the Darwinist explanations. They could just throw out explanations, no proof, no evidence. He rightly pointed out that 1, there's no evidence for such scaffolds, and 2, it actually complicates matters for Darwinists. Namely, if these scaffolds do exist, who keeps building them in the right places that would require intelligence? Okay, they have I think a scaffolding union that for these jobs, and they come in and build these. It's not something you do without experience. You look in New York City, they got huge scaffolding systems. I mean, that takes extreme intelligence to do that. And they're just saying, well, it just happened. Okay, he has no evidence, no proof, just faith. Others have tried to find Darwinian paths around irreducible complexity, but all have failed. Behe confirms as much when he categorically states there is currently no experimental evidence to show that natural selection can get around irreducible complexity. So this is not science, this is what? Faith. They're just making up stories that they have no evidence, they have nothing to back it up. They're just saying, well, this could have happened. They don't even have really an possible so-so story about how it could have happened. Behe does not underestimate the implications of irreducible complexity and other discoveries regarding the complexity of life. He writes, "The result of these cumulative efforts to investigate the cell, to investigate life at the molecular level, is a loud, clear, piercing cry of design. The result is so unambiguous and so significant that it must be ranked as one of the greatest achievements in the history of science. The discovery rivals those of Newton and Einstein." But what they're doing is they're finding things are way more complex the more we discover, and we realize that these things just cannot have happened incrementally, one mutation at a time. And the problem with mutations is what? They don't create information, they are 99.9% harmful, and there's no intelligence, and supposedly these complex systems came about. So next one is non-viability of transitional forms. Transitional forms is the blank. Another problem that plagues the plausibility of natural selection creating new life is the fact that transitional forms could not survive. For example, consider the Darwinian assertion that birds evolved gradually from reptiles over long periods of time. This would necessitate a transition from scales to feathers. How could a creature survive that no longer has scales but does not quite have feathers? Okay, think about that. What is going to happen? Survival of the fittest is going to pick that person off, right? If you're going like from my arm to a wing, what's going to happen when I'm halfway there? If it's possible, I don't have an arm and I can't fly. Okay, it's useless. Okay, it is very. The natural selection would get rid of those things. Okay, so it doesn't really make sense. They're not viable. Feathers are irreducibly complex. A creature with the structure of half a feather has no ability to fly. It would be easy prey on land, in water, and from the air, and as a halfway house between reptiles and birds, it probably wouldn't be adept at finding food for itself either. Okay, these mutations are not, they're going to make things worse. Till you get to the final, it has to be completed. You have to have a full wing with everything working for it to be possible. So the problem for Darwinists is twofold. First, they have no viable mechanism, is the blank for both of them. For getting from reptiles to birds, there's no way they can do it. Okay, mutations do not create new information. There's no way for it to happen. And second, even if a viable mechanism were discovered, the transitional forms would be unlikely to survive anyway. Okay, they'd be picked off. So non-viability of transitional forms. Number 5 is molecular isolation. Darwinists often say the evidence of common descent lies in the fact that all living things contain DNA. For example, Richard Dawkins states, "The reason we know for certain we are all related, including bacteria, is the universality of the genetic code and other biochemical fundamentals." Darwinists think the DNA similarity between apes and humans, for example, which some say is 85 to 95%, strongly implies an ancestral relationship. Okay, what's the problem with that? It's their interpretation of the evidence, but is this evidence for common ancestry or a common creator? Okay, all right, if a design works, okay, you're going to use it, right? Common creator. Could be interpreted either way. Perhaps the Darwinists are right. It is possible we have a common genetic code because we're all descended from a common ancestor, but they could just as easily be wrong. Perhaps we have a common genetic code as a blank because a common creator has designed us to live in the same biosphere. Okay? My car did not evolve from a tricycle. I have similarities because certain things, wheels work, okay? There's certain functions that we incorporate because they work. You know, imagine you lined up all your teaspoon, tablespoon, all your pots and pans, and you said, well, they all evolved from the teaspoon, okay? Can't you see the similarity? Okay, they must have common ancestry and all evolved. My dad years ago said, evolution is like lining up a ping pong ball, a golf ball, a soccer ball, and a basketball and saying they all evolved from the ping pong ball. Okay, that's not true. Okay, we know that's not true. They're each created, they have similarities for a reason. Okay, a round ball works best. Okay, it goes through the air aerodynamically, but they all have different purposes. Okay, they didn't just evolve from the smallest one to the biggest one. You can't just make that. They had similarity because they had common creator. Does similarity and progression prove that the kettle evolved from the teaspoon? No, similarity and progression does not automatically imply common ancestry. In this case, we know it means there's a common creator or designer. It's the same situation we have for real living things. And this is their big thing. They want to line up the pony and the draft horse and say, well, they all evolved from the pony. You know, like really, that's just speculation. They have no evidence for that. Okay, it could mean there's a common designer. As we have said before, the capacity of the DNA genetic alphabet to contain a message is equivalent to the capacity of the English alphabet to contain a message. The only difference, DNA has how many letters? 4 letters, okay, versus 26 in our alphabet. So all living things have DNA represented by the letters A, T, C, G. We would expect a high degree of similarity in the information among creatures, whether or not they are ancestry related. Let's use an example from English to illustrate what we mean. Here are 2 sentences with exactly the same letters. Charles Darwin is a scientific god. The other sentence is Charles Darwin is a scientific dog. Okay? Exactly the same letters, right? Okay? Letters in the 2 sentences are identical and the order is virtually the same. It's greater than 90%. That slight difference in order yields the opposite meanings. Okay? In the same way, only a slight difference in the order of the DNA letters in living things may yield creatures that are far apart on the hypothetical evolutionary tree. Okay, everybody knows what that is. They have the tree and supposedly they try to, and it's just ridiculous how they try to put things together there. Okay, but they want to say, well, a similarity, they must have common ancestry. No, it doesn't take much of a change to get something totally opposite meaning. Such comparisons are controversial and not completely understood. More research needs to be done in the field. Mice genetically are as close to humans as apes. This would greatly complicate any Darwinian explanation. I missed this here. For example, some studies show DNA similarity between humans and the most similar apes may be about 90%. Other studies show that DNA similarity between humans and mice is about 90%. Okay? Nobody will say there's any similarities when we look at us in a mouse, but according to genetics, it's 90% similarity. Okay? Let's suppose that further studies someday show that ape DNA is indeed closer to human than the DNA of any other creature. This would not prove Darwinists that there is an ancestral relationship. Okay, just because I can prove the tablespoon, looks like the pot, and you can see similarities, does not mean they evolved. Okay, they just have a similar function. Okay, and a similar creator for a similar purpose. Okay, that does not mean that they evolved one from the other. Again, the reason for the similarity could be a common creator rather than a common ancestor. We must find other evidence at the molecular level to help us discover whether the common genetic code is evidence of a common ancestor or a common creator. So that's the problem with that. They want to use that argument. It doesn't really work. So what about the fossil record is the next blank there. The fossil record, we've looked at the 5 lines: genetic limits, cyclical change, irreducible complexity, non-viability of transitional forms, molecular isolation. What about the fossil record? Shouldn't we see all this evidence that it's happening? Doesn't the fossil record support Darwinian theory? Let's take a look. Without the benefit of today's technology, Charles Darwin could not recognize the problems with his theory faced at the cellular level. However, he did recognize the fossil record posed a problem for his theory because it didn't show gradualism. Okay, there should be all these transitional fossils going up the geological column. That's why he wrote, "Why then is not every geological formation and every stratum full of intermediate links?" Geology, the blank is intermediate. Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated organic chain, and this perhaps is the most obvious and gravest objection which can be urged against my theory. So he's saying, I got this theory and the evidence does not back it up. I do not see anything there. He's actually saying this is the gravest objection to his theory. But Darwin thought further fossil discoveries would reveal the theory was true. What did he say? He said, basically, we haven't discovered them yet. We're going to discover them, and we're going to find them, and we haven't found them. Okay, time has proven him wrong. Contrary to what you may hear in the general media, the fossil record has turned out to be a complete embarrassment for Darwinists. Okay, these intermediates have not come across. This isn't in the book, but the one they try to claim as the big intermediate is Archaeopteryx, which is a bird, and it had a few weird features, but it was a fully formed bird, okay? And it had fully formed feathers. It wasn't intermediate, it could fly. It wasn't some intermediate thing. I went to the museum there, and there's this guy giving a speech. We walked in, and he's talking about evolution and how things evolved, and I asked him, what intermediates do you have? Where's the fossil record? He goes, well, there's Archaeopteryx. I'm like, that's it? That's all? They still got that? That's what they're going with? Even evolutionist Stephen Jay Gould said that is just a bird, a weird-looking bird. It's a fully formed bird. And I'm like, shouldn't you have hundreds of thousands of, these fossils of half-formed, disformed, half-leg, half-wing? They don't have anything. If Darwinism was true, we would have found thousands, if not millions, of transitional fossils, but now, instead, according to the late Harvard paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould, he is an evolutionist, the history of most fossil species includes 2 features particularly inconsistent with gradualism. This is a quote. Number 1 is stasis. Most species exhibit no directional change during their tenure on Earth. So they're saying we can't see it. It happened, we just don't live long enough. Then we look at the fossil evidence, which should show us, they don't see it there either. They appear in the fossil record looking much the same as when they disappear. Morphological change is usually limited and directional. Number 2, sudden appearance. In any local area, a species does not arise gradually by steady transformation of its ancestors. It appears all at once and fully formed. Well, shouldn't you scrap your theory right there if you don't see the evidence? If the evidence points to what? Creation. In other words, Gould, and I'm glad he's open enough to admit this, is admitting that fossil types appear suddenly, fully formed, and remain the same until extinction without any directional change. So I got this theory, and the evidence is saying the opposite, exactly what one would expect to find if creation were true. Instead of adopting creationism, you think you would be open and say, well, the evidence doesn't support my theory, maybe I need a new theory. I just need to make up a new story to possibly explain this. And his new story is he rejected creationism and he went for a new theory formulated called punctuated equilibrium. And basically, punctuated equilibrium suggests that species evolve faster over a shorter period of time, thereby explaining the huge fossil gaps. So what was their whole theory is it just happens so slowly you just don't see it. Well, we don't see the evidence, so now it happens so fast you don't see it in the fossil record, which just counteracts their whole argument. about it happening slowly over millions of years and we just don't see it, thereby explaining the huge fossil gaps. Gould had no natural mechanism by which this could have occurred, but since he was an atheist, he had to explain the fossil record somehow. It's a classic example of allowing your prejudices to taint your observation. So you've got this preconceived prejudice that this is what happened, and I'm going to make up whatever it takes to explain how my prejudice, okay? I'm not going to look at the evidence even though it goes against my theory. The main point here is that the fossil record actually lines up better with supernatural creation than with macroevolution. Indeed, there aren't missing links, there's a missing chain. Okay, they want to get that's why they were so bent on finding the missing link, and all these frauds, and I won't get into them, and some of them before, they got a tooth, and this is the missing link, and they just, that's not scientific, that's not honest, and then they found out it was a pig's tooth, after all that, but they do all these drawings from this tooth, they just, well, it must be scientific, well, just found a little tooth. There's no chain is the blank because nearly all the major groups of animals known to exist appear in the fossil record abruptly and fully formed. It's the other blank. This evidence, of course, is completely inconsistent with Darwinism. All animal groups appear separately, fully formed, and at the same time. That's not evidence of gradual evolution, but of instantaneous creation. So the Darwinist tree we are so used to seeing doesn't properly illustrate the real fossil record. Jonathan Wells observes, if any botanical analogy were appropriate, it would be a lawn rather than a tree, okay, and a very patchy lawn at that. So just a quick conclusion here, summary, there are really only two possibilities, either God created us or we created God. Either God really exists or he's just a creation of our mind. As we have seen, Darwinism, not God, is a creation of the human mind. Okay? We've made up Darwinism because we don't like the idea of God. You've got to have a lot of faith to be a Darwinist. You have to believe without intelligent intervention that these things happen. Something arose from nothing, the origin of the universe. Order arose from chaos, design of the universe. Life arose from non-life, which means that intelligence arose from non-intelligence. New life forms arose from existing life forms despite evidence to the contrary. Some of these, I'll just read them again. Genetic limits, cyclical change, irreducible complexity, molecular isolation, non-viability of transitional fossils, and the fossil record itself. Okay, so we have an honest look. The facts suggest creation, not macroevolution, is true. We have seen atheists have to work really hard not to conclude the obvious. That's why they need to have a lot more faith than we do. What's Occam's razor? What's that theory? The simplest answer is most likely the true one, okay? And we look at the evidence and it points to a God, doesn't it? It just very clearly points to a God. They have to make up these wild multiverse and aliens and all these wild theories to counteract that. Punctuated equilibrium really goes against their other theories to try to explain away the evidence that they don't like, okay? And the evidence really points to a God. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you, dear Lord. Thank you for your goodness. I ask you to bless the other services, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.